Life is full of work and stress. Parenting can be a mess. Being a woman is hard enough without adding on that extra stuff. We'll cover topics of every kind. Helpful resources we will find. We'll even drink a bottle of wine. Join us. It will be a real good time. Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Nikki.
And welcome to Working Mom's Wine, where we drink a bottle of wine
and whine about our crazy, busy, stressful, nuts working mom lives while we try to pull together some resources that will help on any of the topics we discuss.
Especially this month where we're covering mental health resources.
That's right. This is Awareness April, and it's National Counseling Awareness Month.
That's right.
So we thought we'd address the topic. It's my career and a hot topic all of the time for moms everywhere. So
True. We need all the mental help we can get.
That's right. Children drive us crazy.
That's right. Once again, we are sampling a wine from Defiance Ridge Vineyards. I picked a couple up while we were out there for the trivia night. This one almost killed us.
It was scary, guys.
It came with one of those fancy champagne type things where you have the cork and then it's got all the wire stuff on top of it. So Nikki undid the wiring and she was like, "Oh, it's really tight. I don't know if I can get this out." And then she did, and it
suddenly
flew off and hit a wall. And we were like, "Oh, okay."
I had pointed at a certain wall because it's the wall I always point at when I open one of these at your house, because it's normally where no children are. It's in like this corner.
Yes, the fridge
that
box
only the
had
adults
half
go
of it.
to, right?
Yeah.
Because you never know when a little kid's going to sneak up behind you.
Fair.
But the other one we had for mimosas when we used champagne, it had directions on the lid, like step by step, and it wasn't quite like a real pop off. It was kind of like a twist and it popped off itself. It was much easier. And this one, as soon as I got to the cork, I was like, "That's in there good. I don't know." And I'm like spinning it around, trying to find like a weak spot or something. I don't know. Pushing it. And I didn't even feel any like change in the resistance. And suddenly, boom, it was gone. I was like, and I'm pretty sure I just stood there like this for a couple of minutes because it did. It flew right at the wall, ricocheted back.
It was like a scene from a movie where it like bounces off of different things and people are like...
And we were so mad we weren't recording it.
Yeah, it would have been so good to put up on TikTok. Oh my gosh.
Next time, guys.
Right?
Next time.
We'll do better. So this one is the Pinot Noir Blanc de Noir. It's a 2017 vintage. The notes that they mention on the menu are aromas of freshly baked bread, strawberry shortcake, and rich cognac.
Aren't we fancy?
When did we pour? Probably poured this like 20 minutes ago. And bubbles are still going.
Still.
Yeah. I don't know if it'll show up. There we go. Yeah. It has been nonstop bubbling.
It's still sparkling, y'all.
So if you like bubbly wines and you like your bubbly wines to bubble forever, this is the wine for you.
Oh, yes.
One of these days I'm going to totally miss. I've decided I really like the Defiance Ridge selection because they have a lot of really unique flavors. Like the Merlot that we tried at Trivia Night has plum, cherry cola, and vanilla flavors in it.
It was so good. And I'm not a big Merlot fan typically. It was really good.
And the Cab, that's the one we tried, right?
You know,
with the black currant and the plum and the mocha.
I think so.
So good.
I say I'm not a big Merlot fan, but I think looking back on the last couple years, I was just not a fan of the kind of Merlot that my ex liked to drink because I always found his disgusting. And I've tried several between you and Hannah, and I've liked them. So maybe it was just his Schnucks brand, whatever it was.
I was going to say, he strikes me as like a Franzia type of person.
It wasn't boxed, but I can't remember what it was that he used to get when we would get our own bottles. And I was like, this is so dry.
I could see him just going for like a base cheap as you can get thing though.
Yeah. It's possible.
Because he's cheap as you can know.
Oh, guys, while we're on the topic of exes real quick. I'm sure this has happened to other women before, but I'm on social media, right? And I'm scrolling through posts about this book series I'm reading. and just watching funny posts about the characters and stuff. And there's this trend right now on Book Talk where this particular book series, women who are married and have just become obsessed with the men in these books have their husbands read the series too, and they catch their reactions to like the big parts in the story plots, and they have some really entertaining reactions to it, and actually usually wind up really loving the books too, because there's a lot of battle and war and stuff in it too. And not that all guys have to love war and all women have to love spicy things, but it's a great combination of all of the above with some really wonderful character development. So it's got a little bit of something for everybody. So they usually wind up going into it thinking this is my wife's fairy corn book, and I'm not going to like it. And they usually wind up loving it, but they get really invested in the characters, and they have these big gut reactions like we have when things happen to them, right? So these women are recording it because it's funny. And I come across this one, and I'm watching this guy, and I'm like, man, there's something about this guy, and I can't figure it out. Like, why? There's something familiar about him, and I can't figure it out. And then, so I start watching the whole series that she's recorded of him. And I'm like trying to figure out, what is it about this guy? It doesn't, I don't know how to put it. It didn't like rub me the wrong way. And it didn't creep me out. But there was something, and I couldn't even come up with the word familiar. Mm-hmm. But that's what it was. There was something familiar about him. And then comes this post where instead of shooting him from the side reacting, he's on his car dashboard camera, and he looks right at the camera, and I saw my ex. He had the same eyes, the same teeth, and like this weird thing with his eyelids that happens sometimes, and like the same color like it was like I was staring at a wider faced version of my ex. Same,
oh my gosh.
Same mannerisms, which is weird, you know? So you start scrolling through and watching it. It's definitely not him. It's some guy that's married and has 3 kids, and like not him at all, but just like his doppelganger. And it freaked me out when it clicked. I was like, oh my God. And then I kept watching, and I was like, why am I still watching? Like I had this pit in my stomach watching this, and yet I'm still watching because I just couldn't believe that someone looked so identical.
It's like that train wreck where you can't look away.
Yes. And you're just like, how does this exist? And you just keep watching. And it freaked me out.
Oh my gosh. That could be a good horror movie. Like someone is scrolling TikTok, runs across someone that looks like their ex or whatever, and then like they get so invested in it, and then like the dude like looks at you and comes out through your phone. And
let's not talk about people crawling out of screens.
Okay? Yeah. Nikki's not gonna sleep all tonight.
I covered my television with a blanket.
Did you
years
really?
While I went to sleep. Years.
I don't know if a blanket would stop her.
Shut up. After my sister, who knows that I hate horror movies, invited me over for Halloween to watch the Japanese version of The Ring, not even the American version.
The Japanese version is way psychologically creepier.
Years.
Yeah.
And I knew it was not realistic in any way whatsoever. That didn't stop my brain from not being able to have an open TV screen in my bedroom at night for years.
Yeah, and then there was the time that I dressed up as her, and then I left the wig in my trunk for a while, and then you opened my trunk one day and saw the wig.
So she used to work at a movie theater and have popcorn in the trunk. Mm-hmm. And so we'd open the trunk, and there'd be a giant trash bag of popcorn in there sometimes.
Yeah.
Not this time.
It was a scare. What were we talking about? Oh, yeah. People crawling out of screens.
I had forgotten. Why did you bring it back up?
Whoops.
I had to explain that to my kid because she, I don't know, some video game, something she saw with one of the, Asian characters with the messy hair crawling on the ground like this.
Yeah.
And she crawled like that in our house with her
Ari did?
Black wig on. Yeah. She has a Morticia wig.
Did she warn you first?
No. And I said, we don't do that in this house. And she said, what? I said, we don't crawl around on the floor like this. Anyway.
I find it very hilarious that you have a kid that is all into that kind of stuff.
Tell ya. They make your children just to torture you. I said, that comes from a scary movie from Mommy's time that haunted me for a long time, and I prefer not to see images like that. So the black stringy hair and the crawling around like that. Like, please don't do that with me.
Yeah.
You can do that at Daddy's house.
Because they not only had the ring, but they had the grudge. And that's probably what she's imitating, actually, is the grudge.
Possibly.
But
a lot of times they play these Roblox games and it just has characters from scary movies. So, like, she's seen the It Clown, but she has no idea what that is or what it means. So,
well, let's just show her the real movies. No. Then we'll scar both generations.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I didn't know she did that. That's hilarious.
It's terrible.
Well, now that we're scarred, let's talk about mental health.
It's Awareness April.
Yay.
Let's be aware of our trauma and scarring. So this week I thought maybe we'd delve into some topics I might be able to give some educational pieces to, given my experiences in my career field. The first being, you want to see a therapist. There's therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, and coaches, and they're all very different things.
Yes.
There are some that can do more than one role. So you might see a psychologist with a PhD who will do talk therapy and psychological testing, or just talk therapy, or just testing. An LPC or an LCSW, that's a licensed professional counselor or a licensed clinical social worker. They can do talk therapy, but a lot of times they cannot do diagnostic testing. They might give you personality inventories and symptomology kind of testing, but not actual diagnostic testing. And a psychiatrist is the only one that can give you medication management. Most psychiatrists will only do that, and it's a very brief visit. But there are some that also do talk therapy, and they're very hard to find. So if you find one that does both, jackpot.
So, unless I'm providing potential spoilers for later.
Yeah.
Do you recommend, like, doing talk therapy first, and would they then be able to say, hey, you need a psychiatrist visit for the medication?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's generally what I recommend to people. Start with a talk therapist, see if that helps. A lot of times just coping skills might help if you have general issues with depression and anxiety. If you know that you have, personality disorder, a mood disorder that's more intense that you've had for several years, you already know it's there. Then you're talking probably both. You can find offices that have both psychiatrists and talk therapists in them so that they work together, which is really nice. And a lot of these telehealth services that you have now, like BetterHelp and Talkspace and stuff like that, they offer both. But there are a lot of psychiatrists who can only do telehealth with you depending on what your diagnosis and medication are, because there are some medications like ADHD medications or substance use disorder medications where they have to see you in person. So that's something to be aware of too. But yeah, I generally say start with a talk therapist and go from there. And the talk therapist can help you determine, is this something I can manage on my own? Might I need medication? Might I need to consider that? And while they can't tell you if you need it or not, they will say you might consider talking to a psychiatrist and seeing if medication would help. And sometimes you need medication forever, and sometimes you only need it for 6 to 12 months while you're getting things back to your baseline. So it really just depends. And like that happened for me when I went through the separation and the divorce and stuff. I started seeing a therapist, and after a while I started seeing a psychiatrist, and I got on an anxiety medication for a while. But then life kind of got into its new normal groove, and I didn't need the medication anymore, and I use an herbal supplement instead that helps with the chemical in my brain that the medication was helping with. And it's just that I don't need the level of the medication. So there's all kinds of different options out there. And then there's also the difference between a therapist and a coach, which is really important in that coaching is not regulated hardly at all. Nope. There's no licensing board or anything like that. You can just take some online courses and call yourself a coach. So not that there's anything wrong with that. There are
sometimes you don't have to take the courses either.
That's true. There's lots of really wonderful coaches out there who have a lot of great life experience and who were therapists and decided they didn't want to do that anymore. They didn't want to have to deal with all the extra CEUs and licensing boards and insurance and all that stuff. And so they went into coaching. So, do your proper vetting of the person you want to work with to make sure that they're actually qualified to work with what you need.
I just want to say 20 minutes into the podcast, these are still bubbling. It's like an hour of bubbling so far.
That's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome. Especially if you got a special event and you're trying to feel fancy.
It's like a magic trick. You
You'd
know
be
what
great
we
at a
should
wedding, you know?
try in one of these is the edible glitter.
Ooh.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that book series I was talking about, there's a bartender on TikTok who makes a drink for each character.
Nice.
And he puts glitter, edible glitter, in all of the, he calls them bat boys, the fairy boys, in all their drinks.
Oh my gosh, that's so good.
I'm obsessed with that series right now. You couldn't tell. But yeah, that's kind of like the different types of providers. And even when you get down to a therapist, there are very different kinds of therapists out there.
Mm-hmm.
Various trainings, various treatment modalities. Certain treatment modalities are better for some diagnoses than others. Like there's rational emotive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, EMDR, I mean, just to name a few. So there's several out there. There's a great article on psychologytoday.com where you can see all of the different kinds of therapies, and you can click on the link for each one and read about what it is. So if you are interested in getting more information on that, I can provide you that link to put in our comments.
Yeah.
But it's very informative, and it might help you decide kind of what you'd like to look for. Which is another difficult step of the process, finding the right therapist.
Right. I have a friend at work who's been trying to connect with a therapist, and that's exactly the issue they've been going through, is just finding the right one.
Mm-hmm.
The first therapist that they were talking about to me, I was just like, if I remember correctly, I feel like this therapist had a very Freudian focused mentality. Yeah.
A psychodynamic therapist.
Yeah. And I was like, this might not be the right therapist for you. And they were like, oh, I don't know. I'm going to give it a try, this or that. And I'm like, don't be afraid to just be like, hey. And I think at the time they were going through BetterHelp.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's one of the perks is like, if you're not connecting and if this therapist doesn't get you, like you can get a different therapist. Like don't feel like you have to stick with one.
That's right.
If they're not helping you, basically.
On these telehealth platforms, it's really easy to do it without hurting anybody's feelings. You just click a button that says, I'd like a new therapist, and they give you new profiles. And the therapist doesn't always get any real explanation why or anything. So it's not like you have to explain yourself. You know, some
no
people
breakup
have
emails,
anxiety about that. So
no stalking afterwards.
Yeah, and we're just like, okay. And most therapists that are, healthy and well trained know that not every therapist is for every person. Mm-hmm. So much of therapy is a real personality vibe check.
For sure.
There are some therapists who are dry and some who are, not hilarious ones that have no humor, ultra religious ones, people who are atheists. There's a lot that goes into your personality, and your personality very much goes into your therapy.
Yeah.
So, and there are therapists who are more homework based, and some that are more just talk about what you want and let you vent and try to point out helpful things along the way. So it really depends on what you're looking for and what works for your brain.
Yeah.
And none of us are going to be offended if you meet with us 3 or 4 times and then say, this just really isn't helping me. I think I need a different kind of therapist. And we can even help you figure out maybe what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to ask. And this is another place where employee assistance programs can really come into benefit. A lot of times when I talk to someone and I only have like 3 or 5 sessions with them, we spend time talking about, what are some immediate things that can help you in this moment to cope with what you're going through? And what are some things you might want to consider for your future? And that includes, do you want to continue therapy? What kind of therapy might be really good for you? And I can make a lot of suggestions and help them figure that out. I worked with someone who had a very long-term intensive mental health issue that was going to need more than the few sessions I would get with her. And so we spent a lot of time talking about the different kinds of therapy and different kinds of therapists and how to find a good one. And she spent part of our time together finding her next therapist. So that is a possibility as well. Just throwing that out there.
Is it like when you have a rebound?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to describe it. I like that.
I would be, if I was a therapist, I would probably be the one that leaned on humor and jokes. Mm-hmm. And I could totally see where some people would appreciate that. Like, yeah, I am also a millennial and I get this, and let's make fun of everything while I'm suffering. And other people might be like, why are you always making fun of these things? And why can't we take life seriously right now when I need to take life seriously? So it's definitely, I can see where getting the right vibe is important.
Yeah, definitely. You got to connect on some level, because if you're not and you're feeling judged, then you're not going to feel open and able to be vulnerable and share and get to the meat of what's going on.
Right.
So, all good points. So coaching versus therapy, that's, another point to that is, coaching is a different level of work than therapy is. A lot of people just need coaching, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Maybe you're in a tough spot and you need to reorganize and revamp your life and that sort of thing. A coach could be very beneficial for that. Mm-hmm. But maybe you've got real heavy trauma and things like that, and then you need a licensed therapist who knows what they're doing to guide you through that.
Yeah. From what I understand of life coach, I feel like that's more of a top level, like maybe you need help with motivation, or you need help organizing some of your life, or it's the whole, like when they ask the where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years question, like a life coach might be good for things like that, figuring out your goals, helping you get to a goal maybe, whereas therapists and counseling and all of that is for the heavier stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So don't throw all of that at your life coach now. Life coaching is very interesting, though. I recently started, like over the last few months, finding out about that. There was someone at so we do what we call women in production. So part of where I work is considered production, and that's the people who are helping people qualify for homes, all of that stuff, going through the legwork there. And then you have other things which are more like administrative or maintenance or IT. IT falls under the like non-production side. But on the production side, we have a focus on women in production. And in leadership across the company, they have like a women in leadership thing. And so they will do various panels, or we had like a conference recently where we heard from women who run their own businesses, things like that, just to kind of encourage like women in the workspace in general. And one of the panels, someone mentioned, oh, I have a life coach, and, I consulted this life coach over this and that and whatever. And that was the first time I had heard that term, and I started looking into it, and I was like, that is really interesting. It's basically like a motivational speaker, but for you personally, and someone who's going to like help you organize yourself and things like that. So I like that idea too. Like if you're not ready to delve fully into the world of therapy, maybe like dip your toe into the water with a life coach and go from there.
I feel like something like a life coach never hurts.
Exactly. Exactly. At the very least, you're going to get some organizational tips.
Yeah. And sometimes when you work with someone like that, it's about accountability. Maybe you need someone to keep your mind on the right track. And so having that biweekly check-in is like a reminder, like, oh yeah, I want to work on these things and I need to take action on them, and really helping you focus. They're your accountability buddy. Yeah. It's like body doubling for ADHD, Each role has its place and its benefits, pros and cons. So you got to kind of figure out what you're needing and go from there. Yeah. Which I think probably leads pretty naturally into tips and tricks for finding a therapist. And the fact that you can interview your therapist. So
yes, I think that's something not a lot of people know.
Yeah. So one of the tips I give people all the time when I'm not advising through my work is to go to psychologytoday.com to do your searches, because the profiles are pretty specific. You can even filter it by what kind of insurance they take, so if you're wanting to use your benefits or not. But you can put in your zip code and what kind of therapist you're looking for. You can put in your gender preferences, your language preferences, what topics or diagnoses or types of therapy you're looking to do, and it will sort through, and you can see their picture and read their profiles, and there's a link to their website, and they have a way you can directly email them from that page. It's a great way to find a therapist, and it's one of the only ways that I know, as someone who does this for a living, to really narrow down when you have a specific kind of therapy that you want to get. So if you want a cognitive behavioral therapist who works in this zip code and is a female and does telehealth, you can select all those things and it will filter it all out for you. And it's beautiful. Handy. Yes, it's very handy. Even working for a giant insurance company, having our own provider search databases, I cannot get that specific. So word to the wise, I use that website a lot. Psychologytoday.com is a great place to go. And a lot of times too, you can see like what it would cost out of pocket. Like they'll put their session rate on there, what insurances they take or don't take. Yeah, that's my big major tip for finding the right therapist and being able to really filter through.
Not work sponsored.
Yeah. And they will often post if they do a free like 15-minute phone consultation before, which leads into interviewing for a therapist. You can interview your therapist. You can talk to them on the phone and say, and just be blunt and direct.
You're the hiring manager.
Yeah, I'm a 38-year-old female who has social anxiety, and these are some of my major issues. Is this an area you specialize in or have a lot of experience in? Are you homework based? Are you more, talk and venting based? Like, you can ask those things. What were you trained in? What type of therapy modality do you use? And that's how you find out if they do CBT or IFS or all the abbreviations. But you can interview them. A lot of times the interview consultation is free, even though it's only 15 minutes. It's a great way to get a vibe check and to ask those questions. So when you call and you say, I'm looking for a therapist, ask, do you give free consultations? And know that you can see different therapists at the same time, as long as typically the issue with insurance is you don't want to see the same kind of license on the same day with the same billing code. And if you're seeing more than one, eventually the system will flag and they will make the providers give clinical reason why you need to continue if you're doing this long term. But if you're just trying to find the right therapist, maybe you see one on Monday and one on Friday and one the next week, and you've had a session with each and you go, okay, I'm feeling more connected to this person, and you decide to move on with them. That is a thing too. So don't be afraid to try different providers to find the right fit, to ask for the free consultation, and see what they offer.
That's such a good tip.
Yeah,
I like it.
There's just so many different kinds of therapists out there.
Yeah.
I like to sit back and follow the lead of who I'm with. If they want a lot of worksheets and homework and things like that, I'm prepared to give that. But if they just want a place where they can like sit and have their own hour where they talk about whatever they want to, I give that too. Therapy can be many different things. You don't have to be a super traumatized person to want, need, or deserve therapy. Some adults, it's hard for us to make friends, to even have someone to talk about things with that's not a family member. A therapist can be that too.
Yeah.
You can go to therapy just to have a place to vent, a place to bounce things off of that's someone outside of the situation. Just a place to focus on you and what you think and process through those things and focus on those things.
I feel like that's something that we're getting better about too, but there is, and was and definitely is, a huge stigma around, oh, you're seeing a therapist, and it has to automatically,
you must have issues.
Right, it has to be something sensational and dramatic, and it's like, that'll put people off from even venturing into that. And no, sometimes you just need a venting buddy.
Yeah.
Or someone to give you some life advice, an outside perspective on something. Or maybe you do have something you need to work through. Guess what? Nobody else's business.
Because life is full of work and stress.
Right?
You might need someone to talk about it with.
That's right. Someone
to talk about how frustrated you were when you walked into the bathroom and saw the water flowing into the air vent.
Oh my gosh.
That's in our theme song.
So I have a new editing software that I can use, and I can now separate audio from things. But part of me is like, but just hearing that water drip down the drain says it all. That was so crazy too. Like that wasn't crazy. There wasn't even a good reason for the sink to be overflowing other than the fact that like we just needed to Drano it, and I didn't catch that like it was like someone had left it dribbling into the sink until my entire bathroom was flooded.
Kids are neat, y'all.
Kids are great.
Oh man.
I do love my kids, but
the last thing that we have to chat about today is your insurance benefits and how to utilize them properly.
I could use some notes on this.
It can be very confusing, and it can be hard to understand when you aren't taught how to understand it. It's not something they teach you in high school, but it's something you should know. So all the parents listening, take notes. If you already know this for yourself, teach it to your children. When they're about like 16, 17, start involving them in their healthcare. Let them see the policy, understand what it means, learn how to read it, make their own phone calls to schedule their appointments. I can't tell you how many adult dependents I talk to, kids that are like 20, 21, 22. You can be on your parents' policy until you're 26, I believe, if you're a student.
Yeah, it's 25 or 26 for sure.
Yeah. But a lot of times I call them and I have to talk to them because they're their own legal guardians. But they have no clue how the system works. They're terrified to call a provider and ask questions and make appointments.
That was me. Still is sometimes.
Because you don't know what's happening. So, when you're an adult and you're teaching your kids, one of the things to teach them about is how to handle this stuff. Put it on speakerphone and let them listen to you do it several times for months. Yeah. And then let them try it while you're there sitting there to help answer and pop in any answers that they might not know and ease them into the comfort of managing their own health care. But I think one thing that people don't understand, even, adults that I talk to, and I probably wouldn't understand this as well if I didn't have this job that taught me how to read these things, is how to understand, like, what is the difference between a deductible and a max out of pocket? Why is there this coinsurance thing? Why do I sometimes have a copay and sometimes have a deductible? And it's different for several different services.
Yeah. It bit me in the butt with one of our last medical visits.
It's so fun.
I paid a much lower amount for autism evaluation on child number 1 than I did on child number 2. And
weren't expecting that. So first of all, if you want to use your benefits, call your insurance company and make sure the person you make an appointment with is in network.
Yes.
That's number 1. You might have out of network benefits, but they're not as good and it's a separate accumulation. So if you've been paying in network rates to see these providers and you're building up to your deductible, you've almost met it, maybe you've met your max out of pocket, and you see someone out of network, it's like starting at 0. They build the amount in their own column. So what you've paid over here in network doesn't matter towards what you start paying out of network. And that's very frustrating because a lot of really good intensive specialists might not be in network with your benefits. So that's frustrating. But knowing that they accumulate separately is lesson number 1.
Yeah.
So you try to find in network. But if you have a very rare like disease or something that you need an ultra specialist for and they are out of network, put all of your people out of network. So you're putting all of your money in towards that column so you meet your max out of pocket faster. A max out of pocket is the max you should have to pay out of your pocket for the year, the rolling calendar year, for your medical services and things. So if you're going to be accumulating, pick one or the other, first of all, but cheaper if you pick in network. So you have your deductible. That's the minimum amount that you pay before the insurance starts kicking in anything. So you're paying the full fee for all of your visits, no matter what, until you hit this amount, whatever your deductible is. And then the insurance says, oh, you have a coinsurance of 20%. So that means you pay 20% of the fee after you've hit your deductible, and the insurance kicks in 80% until you keep climbing and you meet your max out of pocket.
But you have to meet the deductible first.
Yes. So you have to meet the deductible first. So you're paying in full no matter what until you hit your deductible.
That's what bit me.
Yeah. And then you hit your deductible and insurance says, oh, now we're going to kick in this percentage until you reach your max out of pocket. And then you're good. So another thing to consider is if you have a big test or a big lab or something that needs to happen and it's January, you might not have as much met towards your deductible yet. But let's say it's like October and you need something like that and you think, I got to get this in before the end of the year, before my benefits reset, and I have to pay most of that from scratch. All things to consider.
So I had a medical provider that pointed that out to us one time. I don't remember if it was around, we'd had some eye surgeries. We've also had some dental procedures. And it might have been like a combination of the two. Maybe not, because dental insurance is a whole different ballgame. Anyway, the way some of the procedures fell, we were trying to figure out if it would be better to do something in November one year or January of the next.
Yeah.
Maybe it was a year that I'd had a kid and then we had to have an eye surgery.
Yeah.
But
that makes sense.
yeah, but they were like, hey, you might want to consider this if you've already met your deductible. And I'm like, bless you. Bless you for telling me that.
It's something to consider, especially for us moms. If you've had a kid, the rest of the year, you've probably already met your deductible. So get all the things done you want to get done. Do all the tests, do all the labs,
while we're on it, if you haven't been in this situation and maybe you're pregnant or going to have kids in the future, I don't know if you were offered this, but every time I went into the hospitals that I went to, if I could pay the balance due before we left the hospital, there was a massive discount. Oh. So, yeah.
I was not offered that, nor was I even aware of what I owed when I left the hospital.
So when the registration person came in, and it could be too, like the difference between insurance plans we were on, things like that. Mm-hmm. In the past, I've always done the ones where you pay more out of pocket to have less due at the time that something happens. Mm-hmm. And now I have flip-flopped that, where I pay less out of my paycheck, and then if something happens, I'm going to be paying more out of pocket. So, back in the day, when I was doing it the opposite way, before we would leave the hospital, at some point registration comes and visits you, and they make sure they have correct information for you, and then they would basically hand me this little envelope, and it would have a idea of what I was going to be paying after the insurance covered what they were supposed to cover. And then I don't remember how much the discount was, but it was like, instead of paying this much, if you pay it now before you leave the hospital, you will only have to pay this much. And we were never prepared. It's still hundreds of dollars to do it that way. But if you know and you save up,
you know ahead of time,
maybe you can take advantage of that. And not every insurance plan offers it. Not every hospital does things the same way.
Right.
But my advice is just be prepared, because that way if they do offer it to you, whether it's having a baby or a different medical procedure or whatever, if they offer you the, hey, if you pay us right now discount, then you can maybe take advantage of it. Yeah. Maybe save a few $100.
True. Every penny counts.
Yes. Especially when you're counting pennies.
Yes. Another thing to know is that there's both an individual deductible and a family deductible. Mm-hmm. So if you and your various family members have all had different services and you meet your family deductible first, even though you haven't met your individual one, your deductible is met because you've met the family amount.
Yep.
So it's another thing to consider too. If you have a lot of family members that are on the same policy and maybe they have a lot of things they need to do.
Yeah.
Mom goes and has a baby. Brother needs, some other medical service.
Yeah.
Do it the same year, because chances are you've met your family deductible.
Yep.
And, of course, unfortunately, medical things cannot always be timed out beautifully like that. But
yeah,
some of them
emergencies
can be.
Are very inconvenient.
Preventative things, things that maybe need to happen but aren't emergent or urgent, so you put them off for a while. Yeah. You can kind of time those ones a little bit better.
Yeah.
So just knowing that fact can be beneficial. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, meeting your max out of pocket is a beautiful thing, because then you aren't paying for future things. And then on top of all of that information, there are also copays.
Yes.
So depending on what kind of plan you have, you might not have to meet a deductible. You might just have to pay a copay for a certain kind of provider.
Right.
And that happens a lot with therapy. A lot of times a therapist or a psychiatrist are covered under a copay. So make sure you call your insurance, say, I need to understand my outpatient behavioral health benefits, or whatever level of benefits you're seeking, and they can tell you, is it a copay or a deductible? Sometimes your copay goes towards your deductible. Sometimes it doesn't. So, asking all those questions, getting all that information up front, and knowing that every year it could change. Your employer could change the plan just a little bit, and they should tell you during open enrollment.
Yeah.
But a lot of times those communications are confusing to people. They don't really understand what's being told to them. So calling at the, maybe like second month of the year and really getting detailed information and understanding what your coverage is every year. And the last topic we have today related to Awareness April is, gosh darn it, why doesn't my therapist take my insurance or any insurance? Why do so many therapists not take insurance? We pay so much money every month out of our paychecks to have insurance, and then we go and need this kind of treatment, and it's hard to find somebody who will take it.
Those darn therapists.
As a therapist, I'd be happy to answer this question for you. Now, granted, I have less experience working in private practice. It's been my least amount of experience level, I guess I would say. But I do stay in groups and in touch with the topic in general. And here's what I have to say on it. Insurance makes it very hard, complicated to not only file a claim and do it utterly perfectly correctly to get the reimbursement.
I just don't believe you.
To know all the rules, to follow all the rules, to get updates and changes on the rules.
Insurance complicating things?
Who'd have thunk it, right?
It's like they don't want to pay it.
And then the amount they want to pay you is never your full rate, or sometimes even half of it. So this varies greatly depending on what state you work in and what insurance companies you work with. But as a therapist, when you decide to accept insurance, you have to become in network with each individual insurance. And to do that, you have to apply. They have to say, yes, we need a therapist in your area, or they might say, no, we're oversaturated and you can't come.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they can say, no, we have too many therapists in your town, so unless you want to move to that town, we're not going to accept you. I think that happens less nowadays simply because of the higher demand, but that is a thing. And then they can say, we'll sign this contract for you to become a network, and this is the rate that we're willing to pay you, and it can be dismal and compared to your private pay rate. So it really depends. And every insurance will give you a different contract with different rates for different CPT codes. CPT codes are the code you use to bill, and it represents how long your session is with the client, or if it's just with the client, or with a couple, or with a family, or with just a one-time visitor into a session. There's all these different codes. And I will let you know that there's absolutely zero education and training given on this to therapists in their degree programs, not even mentioned. How to run a business,
imagine that.
How to bill claims, none of it ever taught or even mentioned to me when I was in my program. So the only time you get any hint of it is when you do an internship at a private practice. And then you might see some of it if you're lucky. But a lot of times they have administrative staff that do all that stuff. So you're working with the therapist, getting your internship hours in and doing things for them, and you don't always see what's behind the curtain. So a lot of therapists who run a private practice don't make enough money to pay an administrative assistant. They have to do these things themselves. And then they suddenly realize, I didn't get a degree in business or marketing or billing or coding or all of these things. So it's a little crazy out there. But then on top of all of that, should you decide to become in network, and should you be accepted by the company, and should you agree on a rate, and should you perfectly submit your claim, up to 3 years later, they can come back and say, we no longer approve this and we're taking the money back and you owe us money.
Gosh.
It's called a clawback. It's terrible. And I think to myself, especially as a single mother, single income household, I'm paying my bills, I'm doing these things with my income, and then 3 years later, you can come back to me and say, I owe you $500 because you no longer agree that this was an acceptable, needed thing. Like, that's insane to me. And I just learned about the clawback thing. I work for an insurance company, and I just learned about the clawback thing within the last probably 2 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts. And some therapists will say it's rare, it never happens, I've never had to deal with it. And others will tell you it happens all the time, especially if you mainly work with insurances. So many therapists now decide, I am not going to mess with all this crap. Why bother? It's ridiculous and it's stressful, and I don't have enough time, and the time I spend on it, I don't get paid for. So you get paid for any time you're face to face with somebody, but then all the administrative work and the business work and the claims work, all that stuff, you don't get paid for that. So it's just like your free time.
Yeah.
So, a lot of times it's too much for a one-person rodeo to handle.
Yeah. Man.
So they say, okay, I'm just going to say my fee's $120. You sign something that agrees you're not going to use your insurance benefits, and we see each other, and there's no complications. And some therapists will give you what's called a super bill, so you can bill out of network and try to get coverage with your out of network benefits. But even that becomes complicated because some insurances will not let therapists bill as an out of network provider without signing some sort of contract to be even an out of network provider. So a lot of therapists won't even provide that because that becomes complicated.
That's an interesting perspective too, because as someone who has looked into having people see therapists and not from the therapist standpoint, sometimes I look at the hourly rate and I'm like, oh man. But if you think about it from, it's not just you're paying that for the hour they see you, but they are then going to take time beyond that hour to make notes and preparations for the next appointment. Like if you really think about it, you can cut that in half, if not more, based on how much prep time it takes. So it's like, hey, they might charge $120, but that's for 2 or 3 hours of work.
Right.
And so it really cuts it more down to 60 or whatever, 40.
Yeah.
I work a math job and I do not math on the fly.
When you think about what an hourly rate for a therapist, quote unquote, should or shouldn't be, and you're imagining all these extra steps that don't include the actual time where you're sitting in their office talking to them, they should be learning to be up on the most recent studies and techniques and trainings and things for treating all of these various diagnoses. And many therapists are like generalized therapists, so they treat all of the above, and there's a lot of different techniques that only work for certain ones. So it's like, you got to know everything. Like, that's a lot of ongoing education.
And I'm assuming whether or not they work for a company or for themselves, they still have continuing education requirements.
Yeah. So each state has a licensing board and they all have their various requirements. But usually, like here in Missouri, I'm required to do so many continuing education units per every 2 years. So I have a 2-year licensing period and I have to fit in the hours. I have to keep track of it, I think for like, I want to say it's like 5 years or something like that.
I'm so glad we have our own compliance department.
It's a lot. I keep track of a lot of stuff. And not only do you have to keep track of what courses you took and who did it, you have to keep the certificates, you have to keep the handouts that prove that you went, all of this stuff. And so much of it can be self-study versus in-person, like live trainings and teachings. It's a lot.
Yeah.
And every therapist has to do it, and every therapist has to keep up on it. And we have to renew our license every 2 years, and we have to have malpractice insurance. All that stuff costs money.
Yep.
And then, not to mention the fact, to even become a therapist, you have to have a master's degree. So that's extra student debt for most people.
Yeah.
And then you have 2 to 3 years where you can't be paid in full because you're not fully licensed. You're a provisionally licensed counselor, or you're supervised by somebody. So you are working somewhere where you hope they will let you see people face to face to get your hours in. You are paying a supervisor to meet with you weekly, and you're usually paying their like therapy rate to have an hour of their time to supervise you on the cases you are seeing. And you're doing that for years. And you're not getting paid a full salary because you're a provisional person, so they can pay you cheaper. To survive that is an accomplishment in and of itself. If you are a student in school right now and you're undergraduate and you're considering becoming a therapist, the best thing you can do, in my opinion and my experience, is to work at a hospital admissions department like I did, because you can do the office work with just your undergrad. And then you can continue going to grad school, and some hospitals have tuition reimbursement and things like that to kind of help you along the way. And then once you get provisionally licensed, you can do in most hospitals, well, here in Missouri anyway, I should say, all my experience is local to Missouri, you can do the emergency room assessments, and that counts as your face-to-face client hours. And your supervisor can just be somebody else on your team that's licensed. And a lot of times that means they can meet with you during work hours. You don't have to pay them extra.
So come to Missouri for your provisional hours.
Try to find sweet deals like that. If you're not sure what they are, go on Facebook, join some groups. Missouri Professional Counselors, Ohio Professional, wherever it is. Find some groups, get logged in and say, I'm a student, I'm struggling financially, I need to know what is the cheapest way I can get my supervision done. Like, what did you do to not have to pay a supervisor extra amounts to, like, where there are jobs where it's included, basically, where they have people who agree to supervise the other people on their team so they can get everybody licensed cheaper, and the hospital system or wherever it is, the group practice, whatever it is, will pay the supervisor to work with you. So then you're not paying that extra fee on top of it. So there are ways to kind of work the system a little bit if you know what you're doing. But most students don't know what they're doing. So you wind up getting one of those cheap jobs where they'll take people that are unlicensed and then they expect you to pay for supervision on top of it and try to get your hours, and you're trying to live. So, and start paying your student loans back and all that.
Food.
So, you know.
Working transportation? Nah.
And of course they lied to you when you signed up for your student loans, and they said, oh, student loans make sense because you'll make so much more in your income that you'll be able to pay these payments easy peasy, not even worry about it. In 10 years, it'll be done and you'll be good.
Yep. And we're not going to charge you $500 a month.
I pay $800.
Well, that was just a general.
But that's because I have two separate. That's a whole problem.
Yeah. We got real lucky when I sold one house and we got to pay off some of the private student loans. And we're still dealing with the public ones.
All of that to say, there are many, many reasons that you may or may not know why people use benefits, why they don't, why they accept insurance, why they don't. Lots
don't
of
get mad at the
therapist.
Get mad at the system.
Be mad at the system. Fight the system.
Yeah. Fight the power.
Hopefully, it will just get better and better. Right now, what they're doing is trying to come together. This is something other people might not know, too. Trying to come together and create a national agreement where if you get licensed in your state, the states that participate in this agreement agree that you can do therapy with people in their state because you have passed an exam, graduated from school, and been licensed in your state. Right now, you can't do that. So as someone licensed in Missouri, I can't see someone unless me and them are both physically in Missouri. Mm-hmm. Even though I passed a national counselor's exam that I couldn't take until I proved I had the right coursework and stuff, you know. But right now, if I move to Florida, I say that because that's where I want to move.
I don't know
not
why.
Not politically, but, you know.
It's definitely not
theme
Disney.
Parky. If I moved to Florida, I couldn't practice therapy there. And in order to get licensed there, I'd have to take more graduate coursework because there's a couple courses there that they require that Missouri didn't. And then I would have to be re-supervised and re-examined on a different national exam and be re-licensed again. It'd be like starting from scratch from my graduate degree.
I was just thinking how relatable that is to the mortgage industry, but it's really not, because we also take a nationwide exam, and then every state has its own requirements. And so, for instance, when I switched positions, I had to change my states to align with the person I'm working under now. And I've had to take a lot of online education. But like, that's where the similarities end. I have to take more online education, and then I have to, luckily we have someone who does this all for me, apply to be licensed in all of these things. So she's like, listen, go do this, go do that, send me this back, go hit these buttons on this website. And so she handles all the dirty work for me.
Nice.
But yeah. But there's never a situation where I would have to go take more college education. In fact, you don't have to be college educated to do this. And I would not have to be supervised. Like, we don't do supervision hours. It's just the whole, I mean, obviously they're going to train you, but there's like, I don't have to work under someone for a certain amount of time before I can do it. I just have to pass the federal test, and then any state I want to be licensed in, they all have their different requirements. So I have to make sure I follow their continuing education requirements and their initial requirements for when you're first getting your license. And then after that, you're good.
And all of that to say, given these differences,
go into the mortgage
college
industry.
Education not required, graduate degree required, different in every state.
Yeah.
We get paid about the same.
Yeah, so about the same.
I have just so much student debt from having to take
and lots more hoops to jump through.
Lots more hoops.
Value your mental health providers.
Yes, each hoop costs a lot of money.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, and I think it could too be different. Like, it's obviously you're going to have things where like some things are mandated by federal and state, and other things are just mandated by your particular employer.
Yeah.
So while our employer doesn't require, they did, and now they don't require a college education, there are certain levels of things where, yeah, you're going to have one. Like, I don't know that it's required, because obviously experience can also be considered in replace of education sometimes. But when I was in leadership roles, having a college education helped. Or when I wanted to interview for other ones, the only reason I got an interview sometimes was I had that bachelor degree.
Yeah.
But some places are going to require it. Some places it's like, well, maybe that's not a requirement.
Yeah.
But your side obviously has a lot more educational specific requirements.
Yeah. And each state has their own ideas about what kinds of courses you need to take. And, it's usually something as silly as, oh, well, Missouri required one less substance use course than this state did, or something like that. It's ridiculous. But now they are trying to come CE. Right. They are trying to come together with the counseling compact, and I believe social workers are also working on their own version of this, where we can all agree that we're going to be reciprocal to other states, which will make things so much better for access for everybody, because you won't have to be limited by the state that you're in and that your therapist is in. Also, something to know for those that are college students or that travel a lot for work, you cannot travel into another state or go to school in another state and see a therapist in your home state. That's not...
What?
Yeah, that's not okay.
Why not?
That therapist has to be licensed in both states.
You're there temporarily.
It's crazy. In fact, some of these telehealth platforms now make the therapist at the start of every session ask, where are you physically located at this moment, to confirm that they are in the right place.
I'm sorry. If you're a college student and potentially still on your parents' insurance, and you're just going to an out-of-state college, that is dumb.
So then you have to get a therapist for when you're at college, and then when you're home, you can't see them, or vice versa. It's very frustrating. It's a huge barrier, and I'm glad that our government is finally attempting to address it. I think 34 states at this point have opted in to the Counseling Compact, and they're going to continue to push for other states to opt in. And once we get a bigger number, then they actually get to form the legislation and make the laws and make it a thing.
How many states do you have to have doing that? Do you know? Because that's a vast majority.
I don't know how many, if there's a goal number they want to hit before they move forward, or what the next step for that is.
You said 34?
34. Arizona just signed.
You would only need 16 more states.
And every time I see, it's always on LinkedIn, I see a little announcement oh, this state has now opted into the Counseling Compact and agreed they'll participate. But I haven't seen what has to happen next beyond that. So we'll see.
Wow.
But with telehealth becoming so prevalent with COVID and everything, I think it's became a more visible problem.
As awful as COVID was, I feel like there's a lot of good things coming out of it.
There are a lot of good things, I think, healthcare-wise, coming out of it.
Healthcare-wise, telecommuting-wise.
Work-wise, yeah.
Some companies are rolling that back already, but some are not.
Yeah, some are trying. It's ridiculous. And in fact, in their training videos talking about why you have to return to work, they are recording them from their home on a green screen. So that's really cool.
Thanks again for joining us. As always, like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify, TikTok, Instagram. You can find us on workingmomswine.com, patreon.com/workingmomswine. We have some fun subscription tiers. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at workingmomswine@gmail.com. All of this information is, of course, on the website in case you get confused or lose anything. So we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.